Hello, chess fans. Welcome to another episode of Chess Chat, a program brought to you live from the Rollstone Bank and Trust Studios at Fitchburg Access Television. I am George Marajanian, Program Director of the Wachusett Chess Club at Fitchburg State University. This club, the second oldest chess club in Massachusetts, meets every Wednesday evening from 6:30 to 10:30 in rooms 163 and 165 of the McKay Complex at the university. And with me for this 201st episode of Chess Chat is our award-winning director, Darren Dame of Fitchburg, recipient of FATV's very prestigious Boulder Award in 2009, and he's assisted in the control room and also on camera by longtime Fitchburg resident and fellow Wachusett Chess Club member Brian Bigelow. And sitting across from me is my longtime associate, trusty colleague, Wachusett Chess Club statistician, a chess author, a chess photographer, a very active chess player, Dave Kuchar of Westminster. Hello, Dave.
Hello, George. Good to see you.
Always good to see you, Dave. Well, Dave, we got very sad news for our Chess Chat viewers, because 11 days ago, one of the finest chess players in the history of the game, a former world champion, Boris Spassky, died at the age of 88 in Moscow. And we are paying tribute to Boris Spassky on this, our 201st episode of Chess Chat. He was actually a gentleman among the world champions of chess. I would rate him as a gentleman of the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, we're going to tell our viewers something about him, about his life, his career. He was born in Leningrad, which of course now has reverted to its original name, St. Petersburg. But he was born in Leningrad on January 30th, 1937. And he actually was evacuated from Leningrad. There's a photo of Boris. He was evacuated when he was actually about close to 4 years old from Leningrad. During the siege of Leningrad, during World War II, the Nazis did a blockade, a blockade of Leningrad, and this was a lengthy blockade that lasted, I think, from the early September 1941, until late January 1944. But he was evacuated to a children's home in Kirov, and you found out that Kirov is actually a place far east of Moscow, a distance. But he didn't come back to Leningrad until 1946. And he learned chess at this children's home where he was evacuated to during the war. But he really gained actually national attention in the Soviet Union when Mikhail Botvinnik, who was the Soviet champion, came to Leningrad and performed a simultaneous exhibition in Leningrad, and 10-year-old Boris Spassky beat him. That certainly really got news in Leningrad and beyond. That he did that actually in 1947 when he was 10 years. 47. Now, what he did, the World Chess Federation. He actually became a master at the age of 15, but the World Chess Federation awarded him the international master title in 1953. So that would have put him at 16 years old. He was 16 years old. That's 1953. 2 years later, in 1955, the World Chess Federation awarded him the Grandmaster title at the age of 18. But in 1955, when he was awarded that title, GM, he won the World Junior Championship, which was the third World Junior Championship they ever held. This is something. This is something that didn't start until the early 1950s. He won the 1955 World Junior Championship in Antwerp, Belgium. You know who finished second, a point behind him? It was actually a Latvian immigrant by the name of Edmar Mednis. Does that ring a bell to you?
Yep.
Edmar Mednis, who was a journalist, a grandmaster, a columnist for the Chess Life magazine, came in a point behind him at the World Junior Championship in 1955.
So is that what got him the grandmaster title? He won the junior championship and then was given the title?
That I do not know.
Okay.
I think it was done separately. I don't think actually winning the World Junior Championship. It might not. No, I cannot confirm that.
Yeah.
Whether by winning the World Junior Championship, he was awarded the GM title as a result of that. Yeah.
Because they didn't have the same criteria back then as they do nowadays, right?
No, different criteria.
Yeah, okay.
Now, interesting enough, he played actually in several Soviet championships, but he only won the Soviet championship twice. The first time was actually in I'm going to find it here.
That's quite a statement, though, to say he won it twice. To say only twice. I mean,
well, no, because it's hard to do. That's very competitive.
Yeah, to never have won it once.
Yes, right. The Soviet champion had to be one of the most difficult championships to play in the world. Yeah, absolutely, because they had the strongest players. Yeah. But he won it in 1961. It was held in Baku, Azerbaijan, and he was 24 years old when he won that Soviet championship in 61. But he did not win it again until 1973.
Oh, really?
When it was held in Moscow. So those are the 2 years that he won the Soviet championship. Of course, he played on the Soviet team quite a few times in the Olympiads, the chess Olympiads. The Soviet team always was there, starting, I think, in the early 1950s. They didn't play in the early ones. The Soviet team did not really join the Olympiads until the early 1950s. Maybe it could have been Helsinki in early 1950s. Yeah, they didn't play during certainly there was no Olympiads during the war years. Okay, now let's talk a little more about Spassky. How did he become world champion? He became the 10th world champion. Whom did he have to beat to become world champion?
So it was Petrosian, right?
Tigran Petrosian. And actually, we may actually have a photo we can show now or we can show later. But we Darren, our director, has a photo of Tigran Petrosian. There he is. There is Tigran Petrosian, who, by the way, came to Fitchburg in February 1982 and performed a simultaneous exhibition at the Wachusett Chess Club, which in 1982, during the 1980s, was meeting at the St. Joseph Club in Cleghorn.
Okay. Yeah.
So Petrosian came to Fitchburg, but in 1969, he was the world champion, Petrosian. Right. He had won the World Championship actually in 1963. Yeah.
Right, and then we should say that in '66 he played Spassky.
And he beat Spassky.
Yeah, and it was close, right?
Yes, I have the score of that. In 1966, when Spassky played Petrosian for the first time, that match ended with Petrosian scored 12.5 points to Spassky's 11.5 points.
Yeah. Wow. So one game. Yeah.
It was one game. So yes, Petrosian had 4 wins, Spassky had 3 wins, and 17 games were drawn.
Okay.
So that was in 1966. So Spassky lost his first match to try to gain the title from Petrosian, but in 1969 he played them again and won.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
And in 1969, Spassky finished, the score was 12.5 points for Spassky and 10.5 points for Petrosian. And that was 6 wins for Spassky, 4 wins for Petrosian, and there were 13 draws. Yeah. So those are the 2 matches that Spassky played against Petrosian.
Right.
He won it in 1969, beating Petrosian in 1969. But then he faced 3 years later Bobby Fischer.
Right.
And that match was held where? Where was the 1972 match held?
In Reykjavik, Iceland.
Reykjavik. And you've been there. And you've actually visited Iceland more than once or just once?
Just once.
Just once. But you'd love to go back.
I'd be happy to go again.
You would love to go back to Reykjavik, Iceland. Okay.
Yeah.
But in that match, that's a very interesting match. And
that really brought him to international fame, right? Because prior to that match, if you asked some American, who's Boris Spassky, no one would know.
They would not know.
But that that became a huge international sensation.
But why? But how? Why did it become an international sensation? Is it because we had an American?
Because there was an American, because prior to that time, all the championships were between two Soviet players.
Yes.
So most people outside the Soviet Union didn't know nor cared about it. So this was finally someone from outside the Soviet Union.
Yeah. And Bobby Fischer was the number one player in the United States.
Right.
Yeah. And by the way, speaking of Bobby Fischer, and I've mentioned this how many times on our chess chat, Bobby Fischer came to Fitchburg on March 2nd, 1964, and did a simultaneous exhibition, not at the St. Joseph's Club in Clegon, where Petrosan did it in 1982. Back in the early 1960s, the Wachusett Chess Club in Fitchburg met at the First Parish Unitarian Church at the Upper Common. And that's where Fischer played 56 opponents in a simultaneous exhibition. He actually lost 5 games. One of his losses was against a player who became the chess columnist for the Boston Globe, Harold Ondas. Was one of 5, and he won 49 games, I think, and drew 2. It was a total of 56 players total that he played. And that was written up big time, not only in the local press, like in the Fitchburg Sentinel, but in the Boston Globe, the Boston Herald, the Worcester Telegram, got extensive coverage when Fischer came. But getting back to the Fischer-Spassky match, one thing that helped that popularized that match in this country was the fact that it was being televised on TV by Shelby Lyman, who was the uncle of Harry Lyman, who was a legend at the Boylston Chess Club in Boston. So there was coverage. That was shown actually like once, not every. Was it every day or just?
No, it was every
week,
every couple days.
Every couple of days, right? Exactly. But they would be getting the moves from Reykjavik, Iceland. Transmitted, and Shelby Lyman and his guests, including Edmar Meadows, by the way, who was one of his frequent guests on that program. They would present the game from the World Championship at Reykjavik.
I remember watching, and as far as we know, those have all been lost, right? No one knows where those...
What was that called? Video, sort of tape that was actually, the tape they used, they taped over it. So those have been lost. There's no record of all those programs that Shelby Lyman did on PBS. That's a tragedy that we have no record of those programs that Shelby Lyman did on the 1972 World Championship match. Okay. So let's get back to Boris Spassky. Why do we at this point present the news that was presented when Spassky died? Spassky died 11 days ago, as I said. It was Thursday, February 27th in Moscow, and we have a report that was done by AP that was released by Reuters. Reuters picked up AP's video of the news, and our director, Darren Dame, has a video clip of that news that was released 11 days ago on AP.
Russian chess grandmaster Boris Spassky has died at the age of 88, according to the International Chess Federation on Thursday. Spassky was the oldest living world chess champion and the 10th to hold the title, reigning from 1969 to 1972. That year, he was defeated by American Bobby Fischer in Reykjavik in what became known as the match of the century. Played in the midst of the Cold War, the contest saw Spassky lose 12.5 to 8.5 despite winning the first 2 games. He showed great sportsmanship, applauding Fischer after losing the 6th game. Spassky became a French citizen in 1978. He went on to represent France in 3 chess Olympiads in 1984, 1986, and 1988. After his health declined, Spassky disappeared from Paris in August 2012, reappearing in Moscow that October. He said at the time that he had the desire to return to Russia because his time in France had run its course. The executive director of the Russian Chess Federation told RIA News Agency that Spassky's death was a huge loss for the world of chess.
Okay, so we just saw a clip courtesy of AP on the death of Boris Spassky of Moscow. And we're going to be able to show shortly a interview that Spassky did right after he lost his World Championship title to Fischer in Reykjavik. What's interesting about that 1972 World Championship match, as you pointed out, in the past, world champions have written about, a number of world champions have written about their World Championship matches. Neither Fischer nor Spassky ever wrote a book about the 1972 World Championship match. Other players, other writers have actually.
There's a number of books.
There are a number of books players could find. If they were to Google, they would find the titles of various books that were written by other players who reported on the 1972 World Championship match. And we both own copies of it.
And it's unfortunate because there's a lot of games where people wondered, why did Fischer do what he did, and we'll never know. We will never know.
And it would have been nice to get actually commentary from the actual participants than getting comments from those who
could only speculate.
Who could only speculate why they played, how they played, what they played. Okay, now Darren actually has now an interview that Boris Spassky gave right after he lost the match to Fischer in 1972. So we'll show that that interview right now to our viewers.
Mr. Spassky, how disappointed are you to have lost your world title?
I'm not disappointed to lose this match. I don't know exactly why, but I think that the life for me will be better after this match.
How did?
Of course, I'd like to explain why I think so. I had a very, how to say, my English not so good. I beg your pardon. I had a very, very hard time when I won the chess title of the champion in 1969. And perhaps the main difficulty is that I had very big obligations for chess life, not only in my country, maybe over the world. And I had to do many things for chess, but not for myself as a champion of the world.
How did Bobby Fischer beat you? What made him a better player?
He beat me generally very well as a chess player, I mean.
He was a better player?
Yes, he's a better player, concerning of this match, as a minimum.
Did any of his tactics, the changing of the furniture, the lighting and the board, did that upset you?
No, it didn't disturb me at all. The only thing which was very unpleasant for me was when he refused to come in time for the match, and he didn't come for playing the second game. I didn't like this.
You said you were insulted. Do you still feel insulted by his behavior at the beginning?
Yeah, I think so. You're right.
So that was an interview of Boris Spassky right after he lost the match to Fischer. And Spassky's life was not easy after he lost the match, returning to Russia, because he was criticized, strongly criticized by the Soviet authorities, who said he did not prepare properly, he did not take this seriously. So
to the Soviet authorities, it was a huge deal.
It was a big deal. For him to lose the World Championship.
For a Soviet player to lose.
A Soviet player to lose to an American.
To an American,
no, that was not well received by the Soviets. So his life was not made easier by losing that match.
Right. He actually said here that he thought maybe it would be easier. He felt so many obligations as the world champion that he thought maybe now that he had lost it, life might be easier for him.
But it wasn't.
It wasn't, no.
And that's why he left the Soviet. Now, he lost the match in 72, but he left the Soviet Union in 1982. It was actually, 82. he was given permission to leave the Soviet Union. He requested, leaving the Soviet Union, and he actually married a French woman, and he moved to France. And so he lived in France from 1982, but then he returned. I think he divorced this woman he married in France. It returned actually in 2012, October. I think in the interview.
So 20 years he lived in France.
Yes, right. So he returned actually in October of 2012. 2012.
30 years, yeah.
Yes, right. So he returned to Russia and settled in Moscow. Again, he grew up in Leningrad, but when he returned to Russia, he actually took up residence in Moscow, and that's where he died actually on Thursday, February 27th of this year in Moscow. So he had a very hard, difficult life actually after he lost the championship. It was a tragedy, because he was a gentleman of the game.
Right. So we should say that, as we talked about before the show, that, for example, he mentions Game 2.
Yes.
Fischer had some complaints. He didn't show up for Game 2. He forfeited Game 2.
Fischer forfeited Game 2.
He lost Game 1. He forfeited Game 2. He's down 2-0. And then for Game 3, he had all these demands, and he said he wanted to play in a room, a small room behind the stage, away from the audience.
Yes.
And from what I was reading recently, unanimously, all of his advisors said, do not give in to Fischer's demands.
Right.
If you give in to any of his demands, it's only going to get worse.
Yes.
Just refuse, and if he decides, he's not going to play, so be it. You just won the championship by default. So,
and he had the right to.
He certainly had the right to refuse.
So
even though all of his advisors were telling him, do not give in to his demands, he did agree to play the third game in a small back room.
Right.
And in fact, that was the first time that Fischer ever beat him. So Fischer won that game, and the match continued. But if Spassky hadn't been a gentleman, then Fischer never would have been the world champion.
Exactly. Yeah. So again, he returned to the Soviet Union before it collapsed in 1982. But he did come to the United States, and he came to Massachusetts and did a couple of simultaneous exhibitions in our state. He did one at the Billerica Chess Club, I think it was meeting at Honeywell in 1987. But they also did that same year one in Framingham, when it was the Framingham Chess Club, which evolved into the Metro West Chess Club.
Sure,
But in that year, 1987, it was done at Framingham State College. I was there as a spectator at the one in Framingham.
Yeah, I remember, because I was living up here at the time, I remember being aware of it, and I think it cost $75 to play, and at the time I thought, boy, that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
A lot of money. So in a way,
when you compare it to Fischer, I asked you before, how much Fischer charged for his simul?
It was like
$5. Fischer charged $5 in 1964.
Yeah.
But again, Spassky, it would take, $75 to play him in 1987.
In retrospect, I sort of regret not having taken the chance to have played against him.
But Spassky, before he played these simuls in Massachusetts, in Billerica and Framingham, he played in 2 U.S. Opens, both of which I attended, because I was very, very active back in the 80s in playing U.S. Opens. He played in 1985 in Hollywood, Florida.
Okay.
And I remember this event because there was a 3-way tie for first place. Spassky was one who tied with Yasser Seirawan. By the way, Yasser Seirawan came to Fitchburg in September 1984. He did a simultaneous exhibition at the St. Joseph Club, the Wachusett Chess Club, in 1984. But another player who tied both Spassky and Seirawan in Hollywood, Florida, in 1985 was Joel Benjamin, a very strong grandmaster from New York. So there's a 3-way tie in 1985. In the following year, 1986, Spassky came again and played in the U.S. Open when it was held in Somerset, New Jersey. He did not win it, though. This time he did not win it or tie for first. But you know who the winner was, though, in 1986? Larry Christensen, who's one of the strongest grandmasters in Massachusetts, lives with his wife Natasha Christensen in Cambridge. Yeah. So Larry Christensen won it in 1986.
Okay.
I don't know how Spassky did. I don't know where I can get a copy of the cross table that would tell me where he would finish. But again, so he played in 2 U.S. Opens in 1985 and 1986.
Okay.
Yeah. So what we have for our Chess Chat fans is a game that you selected. You found, which is a very interesting game that Spassky played against Tigran Petrosyan in the 1969 World Championship match. Okay, and we're going to present that to our viewers. This was game 19. It was game 19.
Yep.
And again, this is a match that Spassky won in 1969. Now we've shown photos of Spassky already and
Petrosyan,
and Petrosyan also.
Yeah.
So let us start the game 19.
Yep.
And we will now have white. Who is white? Who played white here?
So Spassky was white. This is game 19. We should say he was ahead by a point.
At this point, okay.
At the time.
All right, okay.
So it's a 24-game match, and the rules were that if it ended tied 12-12, the world champion retained the title.
Yes.
So Petrosyan just needed to win one more game to tie it up. So his choice of opening in this game might have been influenced by the fact that it was getting towards the end.
And he wanted to play for a win.
He really wanted to play for a win.
Okay.
Because Petrosyan, again, this is recent knowledge to me, was basically known as one of the greatest defenders of all time.
He had that reputation, yes.
He was not known as
extremely difficult to beat Petrosyan.
Very difficult to beat. He was not known as an exciting player, but he was extremely difficult to beat.
Yes.
So a great defensive player. So that makes this game all the more exceptional because this is a quick win by Spassky,
which is highly unusual.
Yeah, against Petrosyan.
Yeah, I think you're gonna. It's very rare to find a very short loss by Petrosyan to any player. So Spassky opened the game with what move?
E4.
Okay.
Bobby Fischer's favorite move.
Right. Fischer loved E4. Okay. So what Petrosyan responded with was the pawn to C7, the C5. So what do we have? We have played this opening so many times in the course of Chess Chat. So what is this defense known as?
The Sicilian.
This is the characteristic move of the Sicilian defense.
An unbalanced opening, so black is typically trying to...
would you say this is probably the most popular defense against in a semi-open defense against E4 of all the defenses?
Yeah, I mean it's hard. It's hard.
Would you say it was actually
Depends
ranked
which
as number one?
Databases you look at, in some databases E5 is the most popular. In some databases C5 is the most popular.
Right, exactly. But as far as defenses where E5 is not played, we would consider this the most popular
without a
of
doubt.
all the. And this is known as a semi-open defense. Okay. All right. So, how did Spassky continue?
So he develops with knight F3.
Okay. All right. So now Petrosyan move. He decides on playing D6. There were other moves possible here, but D6 is what he played. He could have played E6. He could have played actually the knight to C6. There's a number of moves, but nothing wrong with D6.
Nothing wrong with D6. It opens a line for the bishop. Also, it allows him to put his knight on F6 and not worry about being kicked away.
Yes. Okay. Spassky's third move. What does he do?
So he plays D4, challenging in the center.
All right. So by playing D4, this allows Petrosyan to capture the pawn on D4 with the C pawn, which he does. C takes D4. That's his move.
Yeah.
Okay. So Spassky's move now, move 4. What does he do?
I'd say 95% of the time players recapture with the knight.
Yeah. Although taking with the queen was possible, however, the queen would come under attack
immediately
with the knight to C6. All right. So that's why this is more played than any other move. All right. Here is where Petrosyan now develops his knight on G8 to F6 and attacks the pawn on E4.
Yeah.
Okay. How does Spassky continue here?
Spassky plays knight to C3, protecting the pawn on E4.
All right. Okay. So it is now Petrosyan's fifth move. He decides to play the pawn to a6. Now, by playing the pawn to a6, we have a variation of the Sicilian defense, which has a name. And what is this called?
This is the Najdorf.
The Najdorf variation. It's named after a Polish-born Argentinian grandmaster by the name of Miguel Najdorf, who popularized this and championed this many years ago. And this is actually a defense that Fischer, Bobby Fischer, when he would play the Sicilian defense, would adopt the Najdorf variation as black. Yeah,
it's considered to be fairly aggressive, and so
and popular, very popular,
and very popular. But I think, again, since Petrosian was such a defensive player, that I feel like he was doing this just because he was down in the match and there were not many games left, and he wanted to play for a win.
All right,
I'm guessing.
Okay, now what does Spassky do in response to a6?
Lots of choices here, but he goes with bishop to g5.
Now we could point out to our viewers that actually, if Fischer were on the white, if Fischer were playing this as white, he wouldn't be playing bishop g5.
Right.
The move that he favored, Fischer did, was playing the bishop to c4.
To c4. Right.
So that's just a preference on the part of the players. Fischer always would play bishop c4. I don't know if there are games where he ever played bishop g5, but I'm not aware of it. I'm not aware of any games where he played bishop g5. So after Spassky played bishop g5, what is most popular here, or more popular than others, is black could play e6, which Petrosian didn't do though. He didn't play the pawn to e6. He decided to play the knight on b8 to d7. So knight b d7, he defends this knight on f6 with the other knight to d7. All right. So there's nothing wrong with this. This is a playable, nothing wrong with this,
playable.
This playable move. All right. So it is now Spassky's seventh move. What does he do now on move 7?
So now he plays the move you mentioned that Fischer plays, bishop to c4.
Right.
And I'll say this is
yes.
I don't know if you can see. This is a book that I'm getting the annotations from.
Who's the author of this book?
It's Andre Schultz, a German master, I believe.
Okay, all right.
And he says...
What did he say? What does Schultz say about
bishop
this?
Bishop to c4 was almost always played here at that time.
Yes.
But later on, nowadays, more common is to push the f-pawn.
F-pawn, f4, playing f4.
Yeah, obviously, a much more aggressive move.
Okay. But at the time...
At the time, this was very standard.
It was a standard reply. Okay. All right, so it is now after Spassky played bishop c4, what Petrosian did was play the queen to a5. He now has a threat.
Yeah.
We see now with the queen on a5 is attacking the bishop, the undefended bishop on g5.
Yep.
So there's an immediate attack there. There's also a secondary threat of taking the pawn on e4 with the knight, because this knight on c3 is pinned.
It's pinned by the queen.
And by the queen.
Right.
So how does Spassky counter this threat that Petrosian has with the queen on a5?
So he makes a move that does two things at once. It breaks the pin.
Yes, breaks
and it also defends the bishop on g5.
All right. So that's the correct move. No other move makes any sense other than that.
I don't think so now.
No. So after queen d2, here is where Petrosian puts the question to the bishop. He plays the pawn to h6, attacks the bishop on g5. Now,
again, this book says the much more common move was to play e6 here.
Oh, I see. The play the e6 so the bishop could be developed to e7.
Yes.
Okay. Yep. All right. But Petrosian back in 1969 decided to attack the bishop right away with h6.
Yeah.
Now, there are only two choices here. We either retreat that bishop, save the bishop by retreating it,
right,
or we take the knight on f6.
Right, and so the interesting thing, and this book says he did capture. He said at the time this was a novelty. This was not something that was played.
Okay.
And he says that Spassky and Bondarevsky, which I guess was one of his seconds, had analyzed the position in detail and had come to the conviction that the exchange favors white.
Yeah.
Which is kind of surprising because most players don't want to give up one of the bishops for a knight.
Right. But again, back then.
But he and his second had analyzed it. And
that's Petrosan's second, Bondarevsky.
Yeah.
All right. So what Spassky did in response was to recapture with the knight.
Petrosian.
I'm sorry, Petrosian. Petrosian recaptured, knight takes f6, yes.
Yep.
All right, so it is now Spassky's ninth move coming up, or no, the 10th move. It's 10th move. Move 10 by Spassky.
So he castles on the queen side, which is very typical in the Sicilian, where white castles queen side,
Right.
black castles king side, and both players attack at the same
This
time.
is common.
Yep,
This is
very
commonly done. Okay. So after casting, now Petrosan plays the pawn to e6. Pawn e6 is his move right here. Okay. It is now Spassky's 11th move. Okay. And what does he play here on move 11?
So he's basically developing his last piece, takes the rook on the h file and puts it on e1. So now everything's developed. The rook is on the same file as the king. It's supporting this pawn.
Now, if our director Darren Dame could keep that diagram that our viewers see, if you look at that position that's on the screen,
Yep.
you will see that every single one of White's pieces is now developed.
Yes.
All pieces, but look at the pieces that Black has not yet developed.
Right.
I count 4 pieces that Black has not developed at all.
Right.
Both rooks and both bishops.
Right.
So Black is woefully behind in the development of his pieces here.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So it is now after rook he1 by Spassky. Petrosian now plays the bishop to e7, the only square he can go to.
Yep.
And that's what he plays on move 11.
Yeah, so here, again, this book comments that in the bulletin that was published, so back in the days of, these Soviet world championships, this was long before the internet or anything, the top players would publish a bulletin with their analysis of the game.
Right.
And the players did say that they thought he should have played bishop to d7 and castle queenside instead of going to the king side, where you're going to see what happens.
So Petrosian would have been safer to castle on the queen side rather than castling later on the king side.
And it says one of the people who were writing the bulletins was Mikhail Tal, the former world champion.
Who was world champion back in 1960. Yeah. So he pointed out.
He knew of what he spoke. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So after bishop e7, how did Spassky respond to that?
Spassky starts advancing on the king side with f4.
Okay. So after f4, all right. Now here is where Petrosian could still play bishop. Still can play bishop to d7 and castle after the next move, but he chose not to do that.
Yeah, and he probably still again should have done that. Should have done it. Yeah.
Should have brought the bishop to d7 and then castle.
Yeah.
But he chose the castle now,
anyway,
kingside.
Yeah.
All right. So that's what Petrosian did on move 12. He castled kingside.
So that was a bit of a mistake.
A mistake, yeah. All right. It is now Spassky's 13th move. What did he do now? How does he make progress here?
Yeah, he plays bishop to b3, and
the question is why?
Yeah.
Why?
I feel like
why is that bishop now moving back? The queen is attacking the pawn on a2, but it's adequately defended by both the bishop and the knight on c3. So the question has to be asked: was that necessary to move the bishop back one square like that? Because was he fearful of an attack with the pawn on b5, which would drive it back? Actually, that would have been a threat to attack the bishop with the pawn to b5.
Yeah.
But there was no need to rush this. But that's what he chose to do. Spassky chose to bring the bishop to b3.
It's hard for us mortals to criticize these things.
It is very hard to understand whether that was really necessary at this time. Here is what Petrosian did in response to that. He plays the rook on f8 to e8. Yeah. Okay. Now, what is the purpose of doing that? Is actually to vacate this square.
That might be part of it.
Yeah, to allow a bishop to retreat back to f8. We'll see. We'll see if that's what his plan is. All right, it is now Spassky's 14th move. What does he do?
And again, another, to me, slightly mysterious move. He plays king to b1.
Wow, he's actually adding more defense to the pawn on a2.
Yeah.
Now we have 3 pieces adequately defending the pawn on a2. Yeah.
As I've told you, I'm always puzzled by this move after castling queenside.
Yeah.
It's a very common move, but
because he's at this point he chose bishop 1 b1 instead of actually starting the
Continuing the
kingside attack,
yeah.
which he could have actually started, but he chose to delay it.
Yeah.
To delay any kingside activity, but he played king to b1. All right, here is where Petrosyan, by playing the rook to e8, now allows the bishop on e7 to retreat back to f8. He's actually taking up a defensive posture here,
right.
Defending the pawn on g7, which is not under attack. You know,
Yeah.
It maybe can come under attack later, but right now it is now Spassky's move 15. What does he do on move 15?
And this is the author of this book gives it an exclamation point, meaning this is a brilliant move.
A brilliant move?
Because obviously it can just be taken.
Right, exactly. He's by playing g4, Spassky is offering that pawn. The threat is actually to advance that pawn to g5 and attack the knight and the pawn on h6.
Right.
So Petrosyan, I don't know how long he thought about his reply on this, but he took the pawn. He accepted the challenge of the sacrifice.
Right.
He was willing to accept the sacrifice of the pawn by white, and that's what he did. Knight takes g4, Petrosyan's move.
And the whole point is it opens up this file in front of the king.
That looks rather dangerous to take a pawn on the g file and allow white actually to occupy, take possession.
On the other hand, it's a free pawn.
It's a free pawn. Exactly. Yep.
He's the world champion. Again, it's it's hard to criticize.
So what did Spassky do after Petrosyan took the pawn on g4?
Well, here he comes. So he plays the queen over to g2.
Immediately attacks the knight.
Immediately attacks the knight, aiming at the black king.
All right. So we have to save the knight. Petrosyan has to say he cannot afford to lose a piece.
Yeah.
So he retreats the knight back to f6.
Yeah.
So that's what he plays. Knight f6. Back it goes. All right. All right. Now what does Spassky do on move 17?
And again, rook to g1. He adds another piece to the attack.
So there's lots of pressure on this pawn on g7, which, however, has the defense of the bishop.
It's adequately defended at the moment.
It's adequately defended by the bishop and the king on f8 and the king on g8. All right. It is now Petrosyan's move. What are we going to do here? What move are we now? I'm going
17. Move 17 for black.
Okay. So now here's where Petrosyan plays the bishop. This bishop, which now is played the d7, the only square it can go to. Yeah. Okay. So how does actually Spassky continue this aggression on the king side here on move 17?
So he pushes the pawn.
18. Right. Oh wow.
Again, very aggressive.
Very aggressive. We have to see this pawn on f5. I see with the bishop and the knight on d4, we have a triple attack on this pawn on e6.
Triple attack, but it's also defended 3 times.
Yeah. Petrosyan, I don't know how long he thought on his reply, but he certainly doesn't like this bishop on this diagonal with this king here. He decides to move this king off this diagonal and plays king h8, does he not?
Yeah, it says in the book that an improvement that was recommended was simply to
take the pawn on e6.
Take the pawn. It's
right. That was an improvement.
An improvement, yeah.
But Petrosyan didn't do that. He chose to bring the king over to h8. Okay, it is now Spassky's 19th move. What does he do here?
So again, he brings another rook over to the king's side.
Right.
And it mentions here there's
a note on this.
Yeah. An immediate threat of this pawn taking here, followed by the rook taking the knight.
And the pawn cannot take
back. The pawn
back
can't recapture
because of the checkmate with the queen.
Yep.
All right. So there's a threat of taking the pawn on e6 with that pawn on f5.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a threat. All right. With the rook now on f1 now, Petrosyan realized he has to come to the defense of the king, and this
defense,
queen.
Right, the defense of the knight.
The knight, yes, the knight has to be defended because that rook is being threatened to take the knight.
Yep.
So he decides to bring this queen back for defensive purposes and plays queen d8. So the queen comes back, defends the knight here on f6. Okay, it is now Spassky's 20th move. What does he do?
So now he captures, pawn takes pawn on e6.
F takes e6. Now, black retakes, but how? He actually chose to take actually with the pawn, but I think you pointed out to me when we reviewed this game earlier that the recommendation was to take with the bishop.
Yeah, it says that Smyslov, who was another former world champion, right?
Smyslov was world champion in 1957. Yeah.
He suggested taking with the bishop.
He suggested taking back with the bishop.
Yeah.
Petrosyan took it with the pawn.
Yeah.
F takes e6 is what he did. But Smyslov, as you pointed out, said better was the recapture with the bishop.
Yeah.
Because that pawn, if it stayed here, would have actually stopped any enemy piece eventually coming to g6. Yeah. All right. So
and again, it's always easy in retrospect after you see what actually happens.
Exactly. Right.
And so here is another move that was given an exclamation point as being a brilliant move.
All right. And that move
so he just pushes the pawn to e5, where again, it could just
take it.
He could just capture, which in fact he's going to do. But the point is to free up this square so the knight can come in.
So that was the purpose.
That's the purpose.
To vacate the e4 square for the knight to occupy that square.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
But I think the vast majority of players would look at this and not even consider this, right? Because you're not going to push it where it can be captured.
Yeah. So this is a great move.
Yeah. So you wouldn't even think of it. You'd immediately rule it out.
Right. Exactly. So what Petrosyan did, he did capture that pawn. Again,
I don't know if he had much of a choice.
It's there for the taking, and that's what he does.
Yeah.
D takes e5 is what Petrosyan did. Okay. And again, he's ahead of material. Actually, when you look at the pawn situation, he's got, 6 pawns versus four pawns. Yeah, 4 pawns.
Yep.
6. So he's 2 pawns ahead.
2 pawns ahead.
Petrosyan, but his position is worse.
Yes.
He's got material He's got a material advantage, but positionally, he's in trouble. He's in trouble now by having the 2 pawns ahead. Okay. It is now Spassky's 21st move. What does he do?
Exactly what we said. He wanted a space for his knight, so he plays the knight to e4.
Okay. Now, we should point out to our viewers that this knight on f6 cannot take that knight. Yeah.
Right.
Because let's get on the board here.
Okay.
If it's black's move, if black were to take this knight on e4, this is a blunder. This would be a blunder to take here because
white's next move would be to come down here, check, capturing the bishop that was defending there,
and with the rook taking back on f8 would allow the queen checkmate with the queen taking on g7 checkmate.
Right.
All right, so let's put this back here. So that's why this knight on e4 is poisoned. We'll put the bishop back here.
And where's
the bishop? Rook there. Okay. Yeah. So after knight e4, next move, by the way, Petrosyan now realizes he's in trouble here. Big trouble. He plays the knight to h5. Plays the knight to h5, which actually adds further defense on the pawn to g7. However, that's not going to save him.
Right, but it's another nice move.
It's a very nice move. What Spassky does now is what? After knight h5 by Spassky, Spassky now plays what?
Right, so we can keep in mind that this knight is under attack.
Exactly, right. Yeah.
And yet Spassky ignores it. He plays queen to g6.
Instead, right.
Instead, attacking the black knight,
right.
For one thing.
Right. So, again, here is where Petrosyan, I don't know, again, how long he thought on this, but he accepted, he said, okay, you take my knight, I take your knight. All right.
Yeah,
but it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
It doesn't work out that way.
It doesn't, he doesn't have a lot of choices here.
So he took. Yeah. He the pawn on e5, took the knight on d4, e takes d4.
Yeah.
Now, if we were to show this position to a number of players, especially young beginners. Let's say beginners.
Even advanced players.
Even maybe advanced players.
Even
Right?
someone
Even
like
advanced
myself.
players. I'm probably not a player, whether they're advanced or beginners.
Yeah.
A number of them would take this night on.
Just take the night.
But there's something stronger than taking that night.
Much stronger.
Much stronger. Now.
Much stronger, not obvious.
We have the board here. Our director has the board for our viewers to see. Do our viewers see actually a strong move for white, which was played, which forced Petrosyan to resign immediately?
Yeah. So.
Do we see it? Not easy. Not
easy at all.
Not easy at all. But we're going to execute the moves for our viewers and show our viewers what Spassky played.
This is the final move.
The final move.
Knight to G5.
And what is he, by playing knight to G5, what is he threatening?
He's threatening mate in 1.
Okay. But why did Petrosyan resign here?
I guess we can show it, right?
Let's show as much as we can why Petrosyan resigned after here, because he just simply can take the knight with the pawn.
Sure.
The H takes G5.
Yeah.
Which he didn't do. He decided, no, I'm resigning the game. Because Spassky would have continued how? He would have played.
So I guess he would just take the knight. Check.
There's only one move.
One move.
The king has to move to G8. That's his only move. Okay. How would Spassky would have continued toward the win? Yeah. Would he not have come down with the queen here?
So I guess queen to F7.
Forcing the king back to the H file. So if he goes back to H8, let's say this here.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, do we actually have a rook lift here?
Yeah. I don't know if it matters which one.
Right. But again, what's going to happen here is that black is just going to have to throw material in front of the attack. In fact, the rook could come up to F3.
Right. So this rook could go here.
Right.
You know, again, he's threatening to go here, checkmate.
Right. And if he were to advance the pawn here, let's say he goes here, does it help? Well, he's threatening mate here. That's right.
Right.
Okay. So what does he do? Okay. Let's. Okay.
I suppose the possibility is he could push this pawn so the bishop is covering the square.
Right. Okay. Well, how about this? How about actually we bring the other rook?
Oh, but here's the problem.
Yes.
Here's the other problem.
Yes.
You do that. Now you've got queen here.
Then it's mate here.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So he can't advance. So he cannot advance
Can't advance.
So he can't advance.
There's really nothing.
And now there's a threat of. Yeah. That is a hopeless position.
So he resigned at that point.
He resigned there. Okay.
So at that point, now after 19 games, Spassky was up by 2.
Right. Right.
Botvinnik had white in the next game. Petrosyan won the next game.
Right.
Spassky was white in the game after, won that.
Right.
To take the 2-point lead back again.
Yeah.
And then the final 2 games were drawn to end the match.
Right. The last 2 games, because they played a total of, what was the total? 23 games. The last 2 games, 22 and 23 were drawn.
Draws,
Out of a total of 13 draws, yeah. So by winning this match, Spassky became world champion. After losing 3 years earlier to Petrosyan in his first title match against Spassky. Okay, anything else to say about Spassky that we have not told our viewers?
I'd say when I was watching when they were playing their title match, Fischer and Spassky, I was 11 years old, and I do remember, there was all this coverage of Fischer's antics and his demands, and I, as an 11-year-old, part of me is like, well, I want the American to win, but part of me was like,
yes,
he's really being a jerk, and I felt like Spassky's the real gentleman here, and I sort of felt bad for Spassky. So part of me, even though I was like rooting for Fischer, I actually liked Spassky better than Fischer because of Fischer's behavior and the fact that, Spassky was just a complete gentleman.
He was a gentleman, right?
And
no, I agree. He had the reputation of being a very humble, was not an arrogant. A number of
absolutely, very humble.
A very humble player, and very modest. Never bragged about his chess playing skills.
And I've always heard, he had good feelings towards Fischer. He didn't dislike Fischer.
No.
You know, and I've also heard, you know, that in contrast to Fischer, where Fischer was someone, and probably by necessity, to get where Fischer got to without any kind of support,
right.
Fischer was just like 100% obsessed with chess and nothing but.
Right.
That was his life.
Right.
But Spassky, you know, my understanding is really loved life, and he had lots of interests, and, you know, he was totally focused on chess.
Right.
Which makes it all the more amazing that he achieved the level he did without being, you know, completely obsessive about it. So Spassky definitely had a more rounded life and personality.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got Brian saying
one thing I want to point out, for example, when Spassky played in the U.S. Open in Hollywood, Florida, you know what he would do on his free time? Because again, there was they used to play just one round
a day
in the evening.
Yeah.
They would play in the evening. So how would he spend the?
Was it tennis?
Tennis.
Tennis. I knew he liked tennis. Yeah.
He loved tennis. Yeah. So he was very fond of tennis. So you would see him. In fact, I remember one time we were in the elevator together, and he was in his shorts with his tennis racket. It was Gail, my longtime companion, and we met him actually in the elevator going back to his room. Yeah.
Wow.
So he would spend his free time playing tennis, and again, that was in Hollywood, Florida, where again he drew first place with the Yasser Seirawan and Joel Benjamin. So you know, again, it's sad to see what happened to him after he lost the match. That he was actually criticized for losing because he felt the burden of, you know, representing
the Soviet Union,
the Soviet Union system. Yeah,
he's representing the whole system. He's representing communism.
Exactly, and it was a big burden to bear.
A very big burden.
Yeah, exactly, and he suffered the consequences, and he realized it was not good for him to stay in the Soviet Union, and he finally was allowed to leave.
Yeah.
Now, what we have for our viewers is a special a photo slideshow that our director Darren Dame has prepared for our viewers. So we're going to end the program actually with this beautiful slideshow that Darren has prepared, and we hope that our viewers enjoy it. And we'll see everybody for the next episode of Chess Chat next time. Enjoy the slideshow that Darren has prepared for you.